Today we're going to talk about some of the major aspects of having a horse. So one of the main things is, where do you keep them? One option is you keep them outside in a pasture. But in order to do that, you will have to have fencing so that you can contain them. But first you have to decide how many acres of land will it take to support a horse.
An acre of land is about the size of a football field, minus the end zones. That's going to be the equivalent of 1,584 potatoes placed next to each other to reach from one end to the other.
In Florida, because the ground is mostly sand and it doesn't have a lot of nutrients, it takes more acreage per horse to have a horse in Florida than it would, say, in Kentucky. In Kentucky, it takes 1 to 1.5 acres to sustain a horse 24 hours a day. You know, in the wild, horses eat 22 hours a day and they sleep only 2. So a horse is constantly eating. So that takes a lot of grass. In Florida, it takes between 2.5 and 3 acres per horse, depending on where you live in Florida. North Florida has better grass. South Florida has worse grass. So if you're in the middle, it will take less. But that's a lot of acreage. But the fencing you have, that's also a key part of it, because you want to be able to keep your horse in safely. You could have vinyl fence, which is this white fence. It's very sturdy. It gives a little, but it's going to keep them in. It is a solid structure. You also have wood fencing. Wood fencing is usually 1 by 6 inch planks of wood put on a 4 by 4 post. You can have 3 planks, or you can have 4 planks, or some people even have 5 planks, depending on what look you want. The other key part to it is you always want to put the board on the inside of your paddock, because if the horse pushes on it, they're pushing onto the post. If they're pushing this way, they're actually pushing the screws or nails out of the post. So it's those little things, especially if you have someone like Tank who really likes to push on the fence. You don't want to have your boards on the outside because he just pushes them right down.
Did you know a horse can pull 10 to 15 times its own weight? That means that some horses can pull 6,000 pounds or more. Isn't that amazing? Now back to the show.
Another option would be wire fence. But it's very important that the wire you choose has little squares that are small enough that they can't get caught, their foot caught in it. So if you had, lots of times you can go look at a fence and they'll have bigger squares. If the squares are bigger, we want to make sure that they can't get their hoof through it. Because if their hoof goes through it, it's probably not going to come back out very easily, and they're probably going to panic and rip the whole fence down. So the bigger the squares, the less that you want to use it, because it can be dangerous. Chain link fence can also be dangerous because they can get caught in it easily. It has lots of little hooks that have open ends, so they can get their halter caught. They can get anything, their tail even. If they have a knot in their tail and that tail gets caught in the fence, they're going to panic and they're going to rip. Could rip part of their tail off. The other thing is barbed wire, and we will have another section on barbed wire coming up soon. You also want to be able to use anything that is sturdy. Like this is pretty thick. Some wire is very thin that you can bend easily, and the horses will probably destroy that very quickly. So if they push on it, you want it to hold its shape. If it doesn't hold its shape, you're going to be replacing it often. You also want to be sure that you always have it secured. So this is secure. We have actually run a piece of wood on top of it so the horses can't get caught in it. They can't get a hold of it and pull. And they can't get their teeth caught on it. If they take a hold, remember their teeth have hooks, and that hook can get caught and they can get panic and take off and really hurt their mouth. Another option would be electric fence. And what that is, you put a fence up and then you have what's called insulators. And they're usually plastic and they can stick up or they can stick out from the post, and those hold the wire. And then the wire actually has electric or from the sun. You can have solar electric fence, and that creates that current that runs through the wire. It doesn't hurt, it just stings. So if they touch it, they know that they're not supposed to be. Kind of like the invisible fence with your dog. It's that same, it just gives a little, hey, get off of there.
Did you know the word fence comes from fins, which was abbreviated from defense? Fences used to be not only made out of wood, but of stone as well.
Another thing to consider when making your fence is your type of gate. And there are many different types of gates. This is a pipe gate with a wire bottom. They do have gates that this pipe, it's just layers of pipe all the way down. That is also acceptable because it's round and it's smooth. There's no sharp edges. You don't want any sharp edges because they can actually hit themselves and really make a tear in their skin. That can be kind of dangerous. So you want to have the round pipe. Notice that when we open this, the corners are curved so that they can't catch any of the horse's body as they go in and out. If they would go out and it's too narrow, this corner would not catch their hip because it's round. We talked about the wire being that you wanted it small so the hoof wouldn't get in it. This one is big, but if you notice, the farther down you go, the smaller they get. So your hoof couldn't go through these down on the bottom, probably up until pretty close to the top. Most likely, a horse is not going to put their hoof through up here. It would be down towards the bottom. So this is a safe gate because the hoof could not go through here. They might catch their toe and stand on it, but they could not put their foot through it. The other thing when you're hanging a gate, you want to make sure that these pins, one faces down and one faces up. If you have two of them facing up, the horse can lift the gate off and it will actually just come right off the pins here. So you would put one on and then you would put this one on and tighten it, and that way can't lift it off. The other way, if a horse comes, puts their head here or even here and lifts, it will pop right off the hinges and they'll be loose. Also, if you have a horse that's living outside, you want to give them ample shelter. So you're going to want to give them somewhere to get in out of the weather if they need to. It can be closed-sided, like this one, or it can be open on all sides. We choose to have a closed-sided one in case we had inclement weather, like a hurricane or something, that we could actually close them in. Most run-in sheds out in a pasture will not have a gate, and it will be open-sided so they can go in and out freely and not get caught. But we have a closed with water and with a feed tub, so if we needed to feed them inside. Depending on where you live in the country, depends on what type of run-in shed you would need. So if you lived up north where all the snow is happening, you're going to need to give them a shelter with sides because they're going to need to get out of the wind and out of the snow. If you're in Florida with lots of sun, they're going to need shade, and it's probably going to be better to have an open building, run-in shed. That way there's more airflow and it stays cooler. If you had a building with sides, it's going to get pretty hot in there. We don't have run-in sheds here because we pretty much have them in if it's really bad. So we talked earlier about the amount of acreage needed for each horse that's dictated by the type of grass. So we're here and we have grass. We have many different kinds. We have a Bahia grass and we have a Bermuda grass, but we also have some weeds in here. So this is pretty good for Florida grass. It is not very thick. As you can see, the ground in between. We also have it cut. In a pasture, you would leave it taller so it doesn't sunburn. But it doesn't grow very fast here. The grass here in Florida does not have nutrients like it does up north. So you can tell that by the color of green it is. The greener your grass, the more nutrients it has. The browner it is, the less it has. So if you had a patch of grass and you were grazing a horse and it starts to get really thin, you want to make sure that you're adding grain and hay to that horse's diet. If you don't, you're going to end up with just total dirt, and you're going to end up with a horse that's very skinny. This is good for Florida, but if you grazed a horse on it all the time, it would disintegrate and turn into dirt. So in comparison to the grass we had over there, this is more of a weed. There isn't a whole lot of grass here. So if you had a horse that was living on this piece of property, they would have a very hard time finding any nutrients from the ground. Everything that they would do would be from what you fed them, either through grain or whether through hay. Nothing nutritious would come from this grass, and they wouldn't even eat these weeds. They would just stand and look at you or eat the fence or the trees. If you were lucky enough to have a big piece of property with lots of grass and you had a horse to live on there, they could live without you having to supplement their diet with hay and grain. But the problem you have is you have to make sure they don't eat so much grass that they actually contract a disease called founder. If they are overweight and they eat too much grass, it affects their feet. And it's a very serious disease. There's a lot of good things about having a horse living in a pasture. That's what God created them to do, is to live in the pasture. But you have to be able to balance the pros and the cons. They are designed to eat 22 hours a day. So obviously a pasture is going to give them that opportunity. But they also will eat themselves into where they don't feel good. So you have to watch how fat or how skinny your horse is getting on the pasture that you have. It is closest to what God created them to do. They were created to be roaming and foraging. And they forage on the grass that grows from the ground. But if you don't have that grass, you may have to feed them some grain or concentrates. They actually give them the nutrients that they need that the grass is not producing. In Florida, it is rarely acceptable not to feed grass because the Florida grass does not have nutrients like it does up north.